morrow, good Friday, my brothers and sisters. Brother, such and such. I've been watching this show called Under the Banner of Heaven on Hulu. And it's about the Latter-day Saints, the Jehovah's Witnesses, I think. Mormons. They're all the same to me, I think. Mormons, right? It's the show about this guy who's a cop, and he's living in the Latter-day Saints kind of culture. And everything is brother this, brother that, brother this. But it's really interesting to watch this show play out. But anyway, that's not why I'm here today. Let's have a conversation. I've been, obviously, I'm a cultural observer, so I'm trying to look around and see what's happening. And my hope is to tell you all what's happening, share with you all what's going down. And you see this stuff just like I see it. But I want to just bring to you a couple of items to your attention. Now, Strack is back tomorrow, so we haven't done an official cross-examine episode. He's been on vacation, a much-needed vacation for him and his wife, and they out of the country, or out in a different part of the country, I should say. So we haven't done an official, but I'm going to put this on the podcast audio. So if you're listening to this and you're hearing it, this will not have. Hold on one second. Are you serious? Oh my gosh, man. Wow. This cord just yanked out for a second. Sorry about that. All right, so if you're listening online to the audio, not watching this live or seeing a video version of it, there will be not the typical music in the background and stuff like that. That stuff that Strack normally puts in. He puts the music and the different things in the background. You're just going to hear me talk. We're going to talk about a couple things. So I don't know how much of you have been paying attention. Strack and I have been talking about this concept of what we call sort of theological versus theological, right? The church being political and all of that. Now, I understand that people watch a lot of podcasts and everyone has their niche, right? So if you don't like our niche, cool. Watch another podcast. This is the niche that we come from. This is one of the angles that we come from as we evaluate what's happening in the culture. So we have this kind of theological, and I have been watching over the last week the political nature of our society increase dramatically, especially for the believer. And it's been amusing and concerning at the same time. So I want to share a couple of these things with you all right? First of all, let me just say this, make sure we understand this. You know, I've largely talked about sort of theopolitical, right? Christians who identify their political, commitments merge with their faith, which on one level they should, but I think people cross the line, and there's its own morality that comes with that. We'll come to that in a second. But the idea of politics, initially, I would have said theological is specifically talking about what's happening in our country. But if you really stop and think about it, I've been doing a study lately, and I want to talk about this idea of Jesus's day versus ours. And I want to show you, and I'm not going to do it as in detail as I would if like me and Strack were here, but I think when Jesus was walking the earth and when he lived for 33 years, and particularly his 3-year earthly ministry, that the culture of his day was just as or more political than our day. All right. So let's start with just the reality. You had in Jesus's day, you had Roman occupation, right? So you had a world power dominating you that was very political. All right. So Rome was the world power of the day. We could all be in Israel, and a soldier could make your wife carry a heavy chest for 2 miles if he wanted to. Like they had that kind of authority. So you had Roman occupation in Jesus's day, highly political. Their whole structure of society was political. They governed Israel politically, and they set Israel up to relate to them on a political level. Israel could not relate to them on a religious level. So their main interactions were political. If you think about times when the Pharisees were worried about what the Romans would do because of Jesus, it was all punishment and taking away this and that. It was political. All right. So you had Roman occupation in Jesus's day. All right. The second thing that we have is the Sanhedrin. Now, the Sanhedrin was a mix of religious and political leaders, because the people who led the Sanhedrin were more the Sadducees. The Pharisees were there. We hear a lot about the Pharisees. Jesus goes out the Pharisees more than anyone else because the Pharisees were the sort of pastors of the day, right? They were the Bible interpreters. But the Sadducees, they only trusted in the 5 books of Moses, all right? So they were the ones they were the more powerful, they had more money, and I will flesh it out. Maybe I'll do that in a separate episode, right? But these people had a significant political relationship with Rome. They were governing Israel along with the Pharisees and some scribes and then other leaders of the day, right? So they had money, they had influence, they had power. Think about this. Rome is not going to allow people who are poor and don't have money and all these things to be the ones who govern a society. Rome wants to have people who understand and respect power that they can kind of work together with politically to govern the nation. We know that, at least from the scriptures, that Pilate didn't want to have a lot of wild stuff happening because he was worried about what Caesar would have said. So you got Roman occupation, political. Sanhedrin was political. It was religious. It was political as well, right? Then you have the interaction, and then let's not even count the supernatural, the robust supernatural element, right? So you got demons are in full force. For today, we call a lot of mental health things mental health, but Jesus would have casted these demons out. You had people there was a woman who was physically bent over for a long time who was taken possession of it by a demon, right? You had all this stuff happening. So Jesus is walking the earth with this highly politicized, supposed to be religious place, right? You got Roman occupation, which was clearly political. You got these supernatural forces, and Jesus comes into the world and addresses, how do we live in this society, right? People will quick to say, well, Jesus didn't come to end slavery, right? But he didn't come to end any of the political things that Rome was doing either. You will find no passages in the Bible that directly tell, you won't even find in church history, redemptive history, largely the church working through political means to present a biblical morality. They did it grassroots. It was making disciples hand to hand and all of that stuff, right? So Jesus's day was just as, and I would say it was more political because Israel was smaller, right? It's a smaller area of people to govern. So the trickle down economics, right? The trickle down politics are going to affect Israel more directly. Like when they pass laws for us, we might not see it for a minute. What we do see is these gas prices rising. That's very political, but that's a different conversation. But like in Jesus' day was very small. If Rome made a decision, they could kill Jesus, they could crucify him. Boom, it happened the next day. Like their political decisions affected things significantly. If Rome decided we're going to change the tax status, we're going to change the way taxes work, it affected them immediately. So I'd say it was much more political. And listen to, and I'm not going to say listen, I'm going to read all the scriptures, but think about what Jesus tells us to do as believers. How do we interact with the culture? And then outside of the Gospels, what did the rest of the letters say? Now, I'm not going to unpack all that today because there's much more that I want to say, and I don't have that much time, right? But think about that for a minute. When we're all getting lathered up about this morality, right? What I'm calling this, what we're experiencing right now in our culture is what I'm calling Paul Revere politics. Y'all know who Paul Revere was, right? Paul Revere was the dude who saw the British coming and ran and rode on a horse and ran around. The British are coming. The British are coming. The British are coming, waking everybody up, right? That's what's happening in our days. Paul Revere politics. The left, it's the left, it's the left policies. No, it's the right, it's the right, it's the right. No, it's the left, it's the right, it's the left, it's the right. And it's just crazy right now, right? It's all of this. Now, let me prove my point to you in ways that are insane, all right? Because this is and this has been going on for a long time, right? This Paul Revere politics, theological versus theological. Let me give you two examples real quick that you've heard me say before, and then let me give you a couple current examples of this that are just mind blowing. Like, I'm telling this to you because I care about you. I care about the church. I'm a pastor at heart, and I don't want you to fall into the theological nature, thinking that you're really standing up for righteousness, because you will not see the stand for righteousness in Scripture. But let's talk about this for a second. All right. So you got theological versus theological morality, right? Recently, there has been a rise in a lot of people trying to decide what does cultural engagement look like. And you'll see stuff like this. Your world is changing. The left is coming after your values, and the world is getting more dangerous and opposed to God and more hostile to God and all of this stuff, right? And I get why people say that. But the real question is, okay, is it really though? Is it really becoming more hostile? So I guess that depends on who you are. So if you're equating a growing acceptance of LGBT sexuality, and if you consider socialism sinful and stuff like that, if you consider some of these things, they're just sort of what they call groomers, right? Culture, wanting to have position the kids to have all this stuff, right? If you consider that like the greatest evil, then I think, yes, the culture is growing in more hostility towards God. But let's just put this in perspective. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a change in the way people are engaging in the culture, but let's put this in perspective, right? Was the culture per se godlier 70 years ago? Well, it depends on how you look at it. If you look at what was happening 70, 80 years ago, you could say, well, sexuality wasn't going wild. So if you were gay, you were definitely in the closet, right? You had the country seemed to be clearly just either Republican or Democrat. There was an essence of, there seemed to be a respect for God, right? People had more morality, it seemed. I mean, if you committed adultery back then, you were considered a home wrecker, right? If you got a woman pregnant, they would say, look, you got to make an honest woman out of her, okay? So those things are true. They're but let's also look at what else was happening in that culture. The same people that could go to church, that would sing hymns and all that stuff, would be in the streets in certain cities with their kids, with a black dude hanging from a tree and taking pictures of it in the newspaper, right? There was outright abhorrent evil towards people of color, women, and other people just because you could do it, right? So that was with prayer in schools, 10 commandments on the wall. So if you're white and you're looking at your world crumbling, there's an attack on whiteness right now. All the stuff from Black Lives Matter and all this Marxism is an attack on whiteness. Put it in perspective. This is the first time in America's history that whiteness is being attacked. And this is about 6-7 years old, right? Blackness and other people have been attacked from the beginning. This is the first time whiteness. Even in civil rights era, it wasn't about whiteness. It was about laws that were created that stopped black people. Let's change those laws. It wasn't about whiteness. Maybe Malcolm X was talking about whiteness. Maybe Marcus Garvey and Stokely Carmichael and a few of those dudes, right? But no one was talking about that. This is a relatively new thing to talk about whiteness. But if we're back 70 years ago, I could you know why you never see black people in movies with time machines? Let me tell you why. Because there's nothing for us to go back to. This is the freest black people have ever been. Anyone who thinks opposite is foolish. This is the freest black people have ever been. I would only go back in time a few years to try to take advantage of an opportunity that I didn't know about. I'm not going back 100 years because they might see me and kidnap me and rip my back open to be a slave, right? There's no way. That's why black people don't be in time machine movies, because we ain't going back to nothing. We staying right here. All the black people is complaining, we staying right here. The reality is, though, back then, the morality that was supposed to be more godly was evil in its application, right? And now they say, oh, systemic racism is ended. 1964. So let me ask this question. Why did this SBC give a resolution against racism in 1995? Why did they have a resolution against racism where they acknowledge systemic racism as a functioning part of what they're asking for forgiveness for? The perpetuation of it is their own language. I would read it to you if I had it in front of me. If I change this screen, it's going to change it, right? So stop kidding me. What we're seeing is an acceptance of sins that we used to not accept and a rejection of sins that we used to accept. Let's keep it 1,000, right? This is cross-examined. My man Strack isn't here, but I'm going to hold it down off the dolo, Han Dolo. Back then, being a racist was celebrated, encouraged, and there were laws that allowed for it. Now, being a racist or a Karen or a white supremacist, whatever, is the worst thing you can be for some people, right? Now, being insensitive to the gay community is the worst thing you can do, right? But back then, it was celebrated. So we didn't accept gay marriage and all that stuff back then, but you accepted all these other evils. Now it's switched. Now the culture says, hey, let's build off of the sexual revolution from the 1960s. Let's be clear. Let's just be honest. Let's just keep it a thou, right? We know from at least the scriptures that gay sex been happening since Genesis 19. Now, some people can say, well, that was gang rape. That was still gay sex to me. That's been going on for millennia. Wow. That's not new, right? It's being accepted now as, hey, let's support these people. And largely, and guess why? Because the church was so evil to people because of their skin color. Now we don't trust the church in terms of people's sexual morality. I think this is more of a judgment from the Lord. But I've talked about that a lot. This is not why I'm here. I'm not here to just talk about race stuff. I can do this all day. I'm woke, as they say. Do you know woke has about as much effect on me as calling a white person honky? If you call a white person honky, they would probably beep their horn. They don't care about that. You call me woke all day. I'll take a nap right in front of you. I don't care. But now let's talk about how politicized, how theological our morality has gotten. This is crazy to me. All right. A couple of days ago. I'm sorry. I do have it right here. I'm an idiot. I got to read this because I have it right here. I got to read it. Here's what the SBC said. 1995 resolution on race. I'm just going to put it out there so the people don't say, yeah, where is that at, Kurt? This is what they said. These are their own words. All right. Now here's what it says. Be it further resolved that we apologize to all African Americans for condoning and or perpetuating individual and systemic racism in our lifetime. And we genuinely repent of racism, which we have been guilty, whether consciously, Psalm 19:13, or unconsciously, Leviticus 4:27, right? And be it further resolved, this is their words, that we ask forgiveness for our African-American brothers and sisters, acknowledging that our own healing is at stake. So let me ask a quick question. If the SBC in 1995 is acknowledging systemic racism and their impartation of it, right? And they're acknowledging that they have been guilty consciously quoting Psalm 19:13 or unconsciously quoting Leviticus 4:27. So what systemic racism changed from 1995 to 2022? So they're acknowledging the greatest sized religious body in the nation in 1995 apologized for their perpetual role in systemic racism, being guilty consciously or unconsciously. Now, today, you're woke if you say the same thing the SBC said in 1995. Mind you, let me put this blunt. This Kirk Kennedy, you know how I get down. There was no black people that I know of strongly that I'm aware of. There wasn't the same black movement that's happening right now wasn't happening back then. They did this as a 150-year anniversary to the SBC, and they wanted to make a watershed moment, and this is what they did. So it's interesting to me. So what systemic racism existed in 1995 that has gone away since then? I'll wait. All right. Let's keep the party going. Here's where it gets hilarious to me. All right. So many of you may not know this, and maybe you do, but beauty is now political. Beauty is now political. So here we go. There was a model. Her name is Yumi Nu. that is on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition 2022. There's 4 different women on the swimsuit edition. I only know this because I saw some of the researchers over there. I don't look at the swimsuit edition. So stop it. Stop judging me right now. I don't. I look at my wife. It's a swimsuit edition. All right. But this is just reality, right? So these women right now, yes, that's right, my brother. The appendix. Thank you. 2018. Go look up Kirk Kennedy, the appendix. I break it down. I've been saying it for years. You can't win, Rock. He'll knock you into tomorrow, Rock. That's how I'm going. I'm getting down. When Strack's not here, I got to be crazy. I got to keep your attention, fam. All right. So here we go. Beauty is political. So Yumi Nu is a chubby model. She's plump. She's what they call it? A big boned. They call it, all those things, right? I'm fat too. You don't say she's not fat though, but she's plump, right? Apparently she shouldn't be on the swimsuit edition. There's 4 women on this. Kim Kardashian's on one. Elon Musk's mom is on one. There's I think a girl with Down syndrome on one. I think, and then this girl's kind of a heavyset model. She's on one of them. All right. And all these people are commenting, right? So Jordan Peterson, which is a guy I actually kind of like him when I hear him talk. I just started following him on Twitter and I realized he's kind of a wild dude on Twitter. Here's what he says. He has a picture of the New York Post, did a story on Yumi Nu. And this is what Jordan Peterson says. Sorry, not beautiful. And no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that. All right, so he said this woman is not beautiful and nothing's going to change that. He got lit up. A day later, this Bama said he's leaving Twitter because of all the criticism he got. You got to be kidding me. This dude, this Bama just said to this woman that she's not beautiful, right? Ben Shapiro on his show explains what happened and is defending Jordan Peterson and is talking about the standards of beauty. And he highlights a magazine cover with what's that girl's name? Oh, I can't remember her name right now. So he highlights this girl and then another model who recently did another cover. They're released at the same time. And the model is obviously in better shape and she's more attractive and stuff like that. And Ben Shapiro is agreeing with Jordan Peterson, and he's saying the left is trying to impose standards of beauty on all people, right? And he goes back and forth. It's fascinating video. And I'm sitting there watching this. I'm watching this like you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. Now, I could be wrong. But my whole life, I was told beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Not political. It's just beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Listen, I think my wife is phenomenal, right? I think my wife is beautiful, sexy, all the things that you would think about your wife. And I would imagine that every husband does, all right? Every husband, I would imagine you married your wife probably because she's attractive to you, you love her. You marry people usually by attraction, okay? Here's my wife. All right? Yes, I got over. My wife is smoking hot. I'm an ugly dude. That's my wife, okay? I got over. Yes. I got game, though. Fellas, ugly dudes have game. You just got to know what game you playing. I got game. My wife is gorgeous, okay? Someone's going to think my wife isn't attractive. They don't have to. I'm the one that has sex with this woman, right? This is my wife. This is who I'm. The standards of beauty were beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It's never been political. There's someone for everyone. Doesn't matter what your weight size is or whatever. I've seen my wife is a small, petite woman. I'm a big black dude. People look at us like they think I'm her security or something. There are times I used to pretend like I was like, oh, yeah, she's here. She's moving right now. Yeah, she's going around the corner. Where you guys at? I just joke around because I'm this big black dude. They couldn't figure out how did this little Latino woman who's attractive marry this big, ugly black dude who I'm afraid is going to take my watch. Beauty's always been in the eye of the beholder, but not today, though. Not today. Theological. Political morality says beauty now is defined by the conservatives or the liberals. So if a woman is a little chunky, she's not pretty, according to Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and many other people. So here's my question for them. I know you guys are watching. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, here's my question. Does your wife measure up to the standards of beauty that you are using? Do your wives measure up to the standards of beauty? Jordan Peterson, could your wife go on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition and be considered prettier than the woman that you're critiquing? Ben Shapiro, could your wife go on there and do that? Right? I'm asking that because they're critiquing and they're making it about politics. Now, I don't agree with the left. I don't agree with the left or the right in many things. I think the left is evil, the right is evil. Everyone's evil in their own minds, to me, to be honest. And the left is going way too hard on some things. But let's just keep it 1,000, right? Our culture has made what used to be beautiful was women who were like anorexic. I've seen documentaries and stories of former Victoria's Secret models and different models who were forced not to eat, almost look like they're on heroines. These women's bodies are photoshopped in the picture. Some of them, they're spray tanned and they have access to they have someone else doing their makeup. These women are not naturally beautiful. They're not naturally, how they look is because they have professionals, the best at their craft, making them look that way. And so with the swimsuit model, what I think they're trying to do is say, listen, let's not make beauty just be this very narrow, sort of white Western view of beauty. You go to different countries in the world, they wouldn't think that this supermodel is as pretty as these other women. There's no shame in that. It's not political. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Why is it political? Now, if we want to get biblical, then we go to Proverbs. Beauty is fleeting, right? Do you realize you could marry a supermodel? She goes to the grocery store, gets in a car accident, and half her body is deformed, and you're still married to her? So you got to find beauty in a whole different way. But not today, though. Not today. So if you put a chubby woman on Sports Illustrated, the conservatives, at least, are saying that's not attractive. She's not pretty. But Ben Shapiro, who are you? I bet you a lot of people don't think your wife is pretty, fam. Jordan Peterson, I bet you a lot of people wouldn't think your wife is pretty. So, like, cut it out. Church, don't buy into this stuff. Don't fall for this. The Bible says beauty is fleeting. We don't even need to work with it. And first of all, a lot of dudes shouldn't even be looking at the swimsuit. I'm only bringing it up to make the point. I don't even subscribe to Sports Illustrated. I only saw this because it was on my feed and I thought, let's talk about it. All right. There has been a ton of arguments about Tim Keller. It is like Tim Keller is either king, clown, or something else. And a lot of it centers around Tim Keller's cultural engagement. The critique is that he has a winsomeness approach that doesn't match the culture. So that's the critique. Tim Keller has a winsome approach that does not match where things are in the culture, and we can't be thinking about the culture in a winsome way, right? And so that's what the issue is. I'm looking at this, I'm reading these articles, and I'm wondering, first of all, why do you care what Tim Keller thinks? Why does Tim Keller's approach, why is it so offensive or so concerning to some people? Why? Why does it matter if Tim Keller has a winsome approach? You don't know Tim Keller. He's not your pastor. You don't go to his church. You don't go to a church planted by his network. Why are so many people uptight and up in arms about what they call a winsomeness cultural methodology approach in this political aggressive culture? So why is it? And the next question is, then why is there either or? Like, why does it have to be either winsome or really aggressive? Now, remember what I said earlier, that in Jesus's day, it was political divisiveness galore, right? And the moral commands on which were like, love your neighbor, or whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them. That's the law and the prophets, the whole Good Samaritan narrative. All of this comes out by Jesus in a politically divisive. We always think about everything from a religious perspective. No, Jesus stepped in to one of the most politically divisive epicenters in the world at that time and told them, this is how you live despite all this political divisiveness. So why is it different for us, right? So this whole winsome versus aggressive. So I don't get, and so then there's a deeper question for me. Because what there seems to be in human, and this is the question I think we need to ask ourselves, is Tim Keller's approach better than Tom Askell's approach or Tom Buck's approach, right? Is Tim Keller's approach better than Vodi Bachum's approach? That's the wrong question, right? The question that we should be asking ourselves is, how are we doing with discerning our innate desire to worship other people, right? And let me ask a question to prove my point. How come you don't hear people claiming to be a Paulinist or a Johanninist or a Lucist or a Matthewist, Peterist, Cephas? Now, I'm not saying that's right. We know that but I'm just, why don't you hear people claiming to be that? Why are people Calvinists, Arminian, right? What? Calvin didn't invent anything. He only tried to explain what he saw Paul say. But why is there this innate desire to identify with individuals? And I think that's really at the heart of the Tim Keller issue. It's not, is his methodology good or bad? It's you identify with him in ways that may be unhealthy for you as an individual believer. And the Lord may be exposing what we call the celebrity culture. He may be exposing it in such a way that now in this highly politicized culture, for some people, Tim Keller of all people is now the enemy. He's not the enemy because he's changed his theology. He's not the enemy because he's done. No, he's the enemy because they think he's not engaging politically in the culture in a different way. But I don't understand this, right? This identification of being with people, of associating with people. Now, in the Bible, it's not good either, right? Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, and I think this perfectly describes the theological culture that we live in. By theological, I'm talking about Christians, not the world. I don't really talk about the world unless I make reference to that. I'm talking about Christians. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3. Listen to this. For my part, brothers and sisters, I was not able to speak to you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as babies in Christ. I gave you milk to drink, not solid food, since you were not yet ready for it. In fact, you are still not ready, because you are still worldly. For since there is envy and strife among you, are you not worldly and behaving like mere humans? For whenever someone says, I belong to Paul, and another, I belong to Apollos, are you not acting like mere humans? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? They are servants through whom you believed, and each has the role the Lord has given. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So that neither who plants or he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth, right? And then another passage, Paul says, man, I'm glad I didn't baptize any of you, because it would be even worse. The real question is not Tim Keller's methodology versus Vodi Bachum's or whoever else that you think is engaging the culture. It's, do you idolize these people? Like, even identifying as a Calvinist, I get why people say it. I agree with the theology that he espouses, but let's be honest. And you and I, between us, it's just us. We know that people idolize these men. And the proof is, I never hear people saying, I'm a Paulinist. And I mean, we shouldn't, according to Paul, but at least identify with the source of Calvin's theology, right? Identify with the people don't want to say that, and you know who else people don't want to be like? I'm like Christ, right? We don't want to be like Christ. We want to be like other people. This idea of vicarious atonement, right? Where Jesus takes on our sinfulness and our wrath, the wrath for us, and we take on his righteousness, and there's this vicarious atonement. I think that vicarious atonement is what we give to other people. So we live vicariously through Tim Keller's ministry. We live vicariously through John Piper's and Vodi Bachum's and whoever else you respect. And then when they start to disappoint, then all of a sudden now we need to listen. That's why I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not an Arminian. I don't care about none of that. I want to know what the Bible says. And like Paul, I'm growing and wanting to know Christ and him crucified. I don't care about all of this stuff. This is all theological morality. Brothers and sisters, it is not from the Lord. Do not fall into this. Man, there's so much more I want to say, but I got to go pick up my kids. One last thing. This is something that's been very new for me, but it's been irritating to me. This whole phraseology of you're not a Christian if. So I recently saw someone say, a pastor, and I respect this guy. I don't know him, but I respect him. But he said, you're not a pastor if you don't think life begins at conception, essentially. Okay. So here's a problem with statements like that. When you say you're not a Christian if, two things are a problem to me. One, the people who say it never mention the sins they struggle with. And let's be clear, every single one of us has sin areas in our lives that are not becoming of a Christian, right? They're not, oh, I'm a good Christian. No, these are the opposite of what we should be doing. We all have sin issues in our lives that are not very becoming, right? But the people who say that never acknowledge that. Hey, you're not a Christian if you do. What if I said, hey, you're not a pastor if you tell other people they're not a Christian if they don't believe life begins at conception, okay? It's hypocritical to say that because all of us have lives. Now, we can say, you may not, you judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. It doesn't seem like you believe in the Lord if you think these things. You may have you should be questioning, okay, that's fine. But when you say you're not a Christian, that's dangerous. Here's a second reason why it's very dangerous. Christianity is not about expressed morality in and of itself. It's only a part of it. And missiologically, Christianity is about making disciples, right? Jesus said, go into all the world and make disciples, right? In Mark 4, Jesus told a parable where there's going to be different kinds of fruit. The fourth seed had 30, 60, and 100-fold, right? You got one person was given a different narrative about the gifts of God. You got one person, the talents, right? Parable of the talents. One guy had one had 5, one had 10. You got Romans 12:3 talking about the measure of faith that God has given you. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but by the measure of faith, right? So you have all these different dynamics that indicate that discipleship is happening and people will be in various levels of maturity. I just read to you 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul says you need your babies in Christ. Hebrews 5:12 talks about solid food is for the mature who have their powers of discernment trained and practiced by distinguishing good and evil. So there are discipleship issues that need to happen in people's lives. What happens if you get a new convert in your church that was pro-choice and they just got saved and they're still wrestling with that issue? They're a Christian, they've accepted Jesus. Now, mind you, remember this. When people accepted Jesus in Jesus' day and in Acts, that when they accepted Jesus, they got baptized immediately, right? There was no, hey, let's come back in 10, 15 years. Let's see some fruit in your life. It was, you profess to believe, we're baptizing you. The apostles never baptized anyone that wasn't a Christian because being a Christian was to say, I'm changing my mind to follow Jesus. But there was no expressed moral difference in any of those people. If they were in sexual relationships, they still had to work their way through that. They had to get out of it. Whatever they were into, it was a part of the process of discipleship. So if you got a new convert who's still wrestling with that issue, and you say you're not a Christian unless you think this, then you bind that person's conscience instead of disciple them. We are to make disciples, not declarations of who's saved and who isn't. We make disciples. People need to be discipled. Now, if a person dies a certain way, believing a certain thing, okay, I can say, all right, I'm not sure if they believe. But we make disciples. Disciples, brothers and sisters. We're binding people's conscience over issues that are the hot political buttons of the day. And please don't say to me, well, no, the Bible do not kill. That's why my conviction from abortion is Genesis 9, do not kill. Please. There's tons of passages in the Bible about sins. Are you passionate about every one of them? If morality, why is morality how passionate you are about abortion? But the Bible talks about true religion, James, right? Is to care for orphans and widows. Are you saying you're not a true Christian if you don't care for orphans and widows? Are you saying you're not a true Christian if you struggle with drug addiction? Are you saying you're not a true Christian if you... No, why are you making abortion and some of these political issues of our day the standard for people's salvation? That is sinful, brothers and sisters. It's what the Pharisees did. You look, there are so many people now. You know what Corbin is? Corbin is this thing in the Bible that Jesus rebuked the Pharisees for, because Corbin allowed people to give money to the temple instead of care for their moms and dads. So if you got in a fight with your mom and dad and were angry at them, you could say, I'm giving my money to the temple instead of to you, even though the 10 commandments say honor your mother and father, right? He called that Corbin. Do you know, because of all the race stuff in this country, that there are some people, that churches that may feel like, hey, we feel like a burden to care for these churches in lower income neighborhoods, and we want to invest because we're an affluent church. They're going to be called woke now. So it's the new Corbin. It's the new Corbin. They can't care about that at all, even if it's from a legitimate conviction, not because they feel like they need to repent of whiteness, but they want to repent because they're affluent and they think this community isn't, and they want to invest. That's going to be called woke to some people, because some of you, pastors in particular, have screamed about this. Or some of you on the other side have turned so many people off to genuinely caring about the poor, because you've made it seem like if they don't think that racism is the biggest issue and fight white supremacy, that they're somehow not Christians either. Shame on all of us. If you are a pastor, you should never say you're not a Christian unless you say, if you don't believe in Jesus. Everything else is a discipleship issue. And if fellow pastor, if you are saying, and even other Christian, if you are saying, but I'm talking to pastors now because these are my colleagues. If that's what you're saying, then I think, brother, you are not a good pastor, because you don't know these people. You need to disciple these folks. Some people are confused. There's a culture of confusion. You can't even call a woman because now you can get, it's a culture of confusion. We have to disciple people. I think all Christians, but particularly pastors, should shut up and stop saying you're not a Christian unless it's going to be you don't believe in Jesus. You reject Jesus, then you're not a Christian. Everything else is a discipleship issue. And I do not think that everyone who stands before the Lord, who's accepted into the kingdom, will have the soundest theology. I just don't. And if they do, none of us are going to have the soundest obedience. We all fall short of the glory of God. Stop pretending like you don't and being so theological that you're binding people's consciences to essentially vote conservative. I'm sorry. There will be conservatives, liberals, all these people around the throne in Revelation 7. We have to be very, very careful, because we are taking on the philosophical, political morality of our day and applying it through a biblical lens, thinking that we're standing up for righteousness, and we're actually showing that there's a lot of unrighteousness in our stance. Man, there's a lot more I wish I could say, but I got to go pick up boys. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for you guys listening and all of it. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Share this with anybody that you think is there. Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Go back and watch this. If you think I'm wrong, cool. I'm not going to be offended. I might think you're wrong. You might put ketchup on your eggs. I never will. We're different people. Having said that, Kirk Kennedy new album dropping next month. It was Serial Killer Still Smiling, and then it was Serial Killers the prequel, and now it's just called Life Support. Crazy project. My last one for a couple of years, Lord willing. Thank you guys for listening. This is Cross Examiner's episode for the week. Strack and I will be back with a banger next week. All right? Thank you. I'll see y'all.